October 24th, 1959. 8:17 p.m. Harlem. Alley off 127th Street. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was mean. A cold, persistent drizzle that slicked the cobblestones and filled the air with the smell of wet garbage and coal smoke. It was the kind of night that got into a man's bones. A Harlem night that promised nothing but the slow turning of the clock toward another hard morning. For Bumpy Rhodes, it was just another Saturday. His driver, Delroy, held a wide black umbrella over him as he stepped from the back of the Lincoln Continental, the car's polished chrome reflecting the dim, flickering neon of a nearby jazz club. Bumpy adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his gaze sweeping the street. Power wasn't just about money or muscle, it was about presence. It was about owning the very air on your own territory. A kid, no older than 16, breathless and wide-eyed, skidded to a halt before them, his cheap shoes soaked through. Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes, you gotta come. Bumpy's eyes narrowed. Panic was a currency he didn't trade in. Breathe, son. Then talk. It's Sammy, the boy gasped, pointing a trembling finger down the alley. The little runner. They hurt him bad, Mr. Rhodes. Real bad. Sammy. A flicker of recognition. A wisp of a kid, maybe 12, with eyes too old for his face and a smile that was missing a tooth. An orphan from the St. Nicholas shelter. He ran number slips, a small cog in Bumpy's vast, intricate machine. Sharp, fast, and invisible. The perfect runner. Bumpy's rules were ironclad. The women, the children, the civilians, they were untouchable. They were the soul of Harlem, the very thing he fought to protect from the outside wolves and the inside rot. An attack on a child under his purview wasn't just a violation. It was a declaration of war. Del, Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. Stay with the car. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved down the alley, the fine leather of his dress shoes crunching on broken glass. The stench intensified, rotting food, stale beer, and something else. The coppery, sickeningly sweet smell of blood. There, behind an overflowing dumpster, was a small, crumpled shape. A boy. Sammy. He was lying on his side in a puddle of grimy rainwater, his thin jacket torn, his small frame shuddering with shallow, ragged breaths. His face was a mess of bruises and cuts, but it was the dark, spreading stain on his abdomen that made Bumpy's blood run cold. Bumpy knelt, ignoring the filth that soaked into the knee of his expensive suit. The rain didn't matter. The world didn't matter. All that existed was the broken child at his feet. Sammy, he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. Son, can you hear me? The boy's eyelids fluttered. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle of blood escaped his lips. His eyes, clouded with pain, found Bumpy's. There was no fear in them, only a profound, heartbreaking weariness. Who did this to you? Bumpy's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of an impending storm. Sammy's small hand, scraped and bloody, twitched. He lifted it, just an inch, his fingers curling as if trying to point. He managed a single, choked word. Guineas, and then another, a whisper of sound. 5 of them, laughing. Guineas. The Gambinos. They'd been pushing north of 110th, testing the borders, trying to get a foothold in the Harlem numbers racket. An insult. A challenge. But this was an atrocity. To do this to a child, a 12-year-old orphan, over a few dollars in number slips? It was a language of depravity Bumpy understood all too well. It was the language of monsters. He gently took the boy's hand. It was cold. All right, son. All right. We're gonna get you fixed up. He looked up, his face a mask of cold fury, and yelled into the rain. Del, get Doc Simmons. Tell him to clear his table. Now. Del was already moving, sprinting back to the car. Bumpy turned back to Sammy. He shrugged off his heavy wool overcoat, the one custom-made on Seville Row, and wrapped it around the boy's shivering body, cocooning him in warmth and the scent of expensive cologne. He slid one arm under the boy's knees and the other behind his back, lifting him as if he weighed nothing at all. The boy moaned, a thin, animal sound of pure agony. I got you, son, Bumpy murmured, holding him close against his chest. I got you. As he carried Sammy out of that foul alley, the boy's head lolled against his shoulder. Through the pain, Sammy whispered something else, his breath a ghost against Bumpy's ear. Promise me, Mr. Rhodes. They don't get to. Laugh. Bumpy stopped dead for a second, the rain plastering his hair to his scalp. He looked down at the child in his arms, a life slipping away like sand through his fingers. In that moment, he was not Bumpy Rhodes, the king of Harlem, the man who commanded armies and fortunes. He was just a man holding a dying child, his empire, his power, utterly useless. A profound, hollow chasm opened up in his chest. He had failed this boy. His system, his protection, had failed. He tightened his grip, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 30 years. "I swear to you, Sammy," he said, the words a sacred vow made in the rain-soaked darkness. "On my mother's soul, they will never laugh again." October 24th, 1959, 8:43 p.m. Doc Simmons' clinic, brownstone basement. Doc Simmons was a drunk and his license had been revoked a decade ago, but his hands were still the steadiest in Harlem when it came to patching up bullet holes and knife wounds without involving the police. His clinic was a clean, white-tiled room in the basement of his brownstone, smelling of antiseptic and stale whiskey. Bumpy laid Sammy gently on the steel operating table under the glare of a single, powerful lamp. The doc, a weary man with bloodshot eyes, cut away Sammy's clothes. He took one look at the wound, a deep, jagged puncture from what looked like a sharpened screwdriver or an ice pick, driven in and twisted, and shook his head slowly. "It's bad, Bumpy," he said, not looking up. "Punctured the bowel. Peritonitis is already setting in. Even if I could stop the bleeding, the infection. He's lost too much blood. Do something," Bumpy commanded, his voice raw. "There's nothing to do but make him comfortable," Simmons replied, his voice filled with a grim finality. He prepared a syringe of morphine. "I can take the pain away. That's all." Bumpy stood frozen, watching the life drain from the boy. He saw the faded tattoo on Sammy's thin arm, a stick-in poke job of a single star. He'd told Bumpy once it was his lucky star he saw the scuffed-up sneakers, the ones he'd seen Sammy shining on the corner just last week, trying to earn an extra dime. Every detail was a fresh stab of guilt. This child was his responsibility. Dell stood silently in the doorway, his face a stone mask, but his eyes were fixed on his boss. He had never seen Bumpy like this. Not when he faced down him not when he negotiated with the commission, not even when his own life was on the line. He was watching the king's fortress crumble from the inside out. Bumpy walked over to the table and took Sammy's small, limp hand again. The morphine was working. The terrible, shallow gasps were evening out, the lines of pain on his face softening. The boy's eyes opened, hazy and unfocused. "Mr. Rhodes, I'm here, son," Bumpy said, his throat tight. "Is it true?" Sammy whispered, his voice impossibly small. "What they say about you? That you're the king?" Bumpy swallowed hard. "Something like that. A king is supposed to protect his people," Sammy murmured, his gaze distant. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "Right?" The question struck Bumpy with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't an accusation. It was a child's simple, devastating query. It stripped away all the justifications, all the complexities of his life, and left only the raw, undeniable truth. He had failed. His kingdom was a sham if it couldn't protect a 12-year-old orphan. He leaned in close, his face just inches from the boy's. "Yes, son," he choked out, the words catching in his throat. He felt a tremor start in his hands, a deep, unfamiliar shaking he couldn't control. He, who had faced down death 100 times without flinching, was coming apart at the seams over a child's last words. Sammy's eyes closed. His breathing grew fainter, a soft sigh. Then, nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the lamp and the distant sound of a siren wailing its useless song somewhere out in the city. Doc Simmons quietly placed a hand on Sammy's neck, then looked at Bumpy and gave a slight, somber shake of his head. Bumpy didn't move. He just stood there, holding the cold, small hand, his own hand still shaking. Then, a sound escaped his lips, a low, ragged sob. He squeezed his eyes shut, but tears leaked from the corners, hot and shameful, tracking down his granite face. He lowered his head until his forehead rested on the edge of the steel table, and his broad shoulders began to shake. The king of Harlem was weeping. Witness testimony, Delroy Dell, Washington. They asked me what I remember about that night. I remember the rain. I I remember the look on that boy's face. But most of all, I remember Mr. Rhodes. I'd been with him 8 years. Seen him ice a man for disrespect. Seen him stare down Lucky Luciano himself without even blinking. I thought he was made of something different than the rest of us. Steel and concrete, maybe. But when that boy, Sammy, died, I saw him break. Right there in Doc Simmons' basement. He just fell apart. He knelt by that table, and he cried. Not loud. It was quiet. A deep, silent, terrible kind of crying. Like his whole world had cracked right down the middle. I'd never seen him vulnerable before. Not once. In that moment, he wasn't a kingpin. He was a father who'd lost his son. And I knew, right then and there, that Harlem was about to become the most dangerous place on earth for 5 specific Italian gentlemen. The promise he made to that boy in the alley, it wasn't just words. It was a death sentence. And Bumpy Rhodes always paid his debts. October 24th, 1959, 9:14 p.m., Doc Simmons' clinic. Bumpy finally raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, but the tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying emptiness. An abyss. He gently placed Sammy's hand down on the table and pulled the boy's overcoat, his own coat, up over the child's face. He turned to Dell, his expression unreadable. Get Sister Mary from Street Nicholas. Tell her Samuel has passed. Give her this. He pulled a thick wad of cash from his inside pocket, $10,000, and pressed it into Dell's hand. For the arrangements. The best of everything. And for the orphanage. Tell her it's the first payment. The first payment for what, Bumpy? Dell asked softly. For Sammy's shield. Bumpy said, the name coming to him instantly. A fund. To make sure no other kid from that shelter ever has to run a slip or shine a shoe for a dime again. To make sure they're safe. He walked over to the small sink in the corner and washed his hands and face, the cold water a shock. When he looked up at his reflection in the cracked mirror, a stranger looked back. The smooth, controlled mask of Bumpy Rhodes was gone. This man was haunted, his face carved with grief and a righteous fury that burned hotter than any furnace. He turned back to Delaware. The countdown had begun. The boy said 5 of them. Guineas. Laughing, Bumpy's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was more frightening than any shout. I want them. I want their names. I want where they eat, where they sleep, where they breathe. I want to know the color of the socks they put on this morning. You mobilize everyone. Shake every tree. Every junkie, every whore, every bartender, every informant on the payroll. Triple the rate. I want 5 names. You have 1 hour. And when we get the names? Dell asked. Bumpy looked at the clock on the wall. 9:19 p.m. The promise to Sammy echoed in his mind. They don't get to laugh. He had sworn it. A 36-hour clock had been started by a dying boy's whisper. When we get the names, Bumpy said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. We begin the eulogy. October 24th, 1959, 11:32 p.m. Bumpy's office, the 21 Club. The 21 Club was Bumpy's fortress, a high-class supper club that served as the legitimate front for his empire. His office was on the top floor, a sprawling suite of mahogany and leather. The air, usually thick with cigar smoke and the scent of brandy, was now electric with tension. Bumpy stood before a large map of Manhattan that covered one wall, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. His top lieutenants stood waiting. Dell entered, his face grim. We got them, Bumpy. He laid 5 photographs on the polished desk. They were grainy, surveillance-style shots. 5 faces. The word on the street came fast, Dell explained. Too fast. They were bragging. A crew run by a Gambino capo named Freddie Gallo. These 5 are his prized animals. Known for being reckless, violent. They were collecting protection money from a bodega on 126th. Sammy was just leaving with the day's slips. They saw him, figured he was poaching. Decided to make an example. Bumpy picked up the first photo. Name: Paulie, the Weasel Fricano. Lowest on the totem pole. A degenerate gambler. Spends every night at an illegal card game in the basement of a butcher shop in Little Italy. This social club. Bumpy picked up the next. Name: Frankie the Pipe Costello. Not that one. A plumber by trade, enforcer by night. Called the Pipe because that's his weapon of choice. He has a girl, a gumma, lives in a tenement in the Bronx. Sees her every Saturday. And tonight is Saturday, Bumpy said, his voice a dead calm. He moved to the next photo. Tony Fat Tony Rizzoli. The muscle, 6'4", 300 pounds of stupid. He's Gallo's personal bodyguard. Right now, he's with Gallo at a restaurant, Patsy's in East Harlem. They're celebrating. Bumpy's jaw clenched. Celebrating. The brothers, Del continued, pointing to the last two photos. Vinny and Carmine Lucchese. No relation to the family. Vicious twins. They live together, work together. They're the ones who cornered the boy, according to the whispers. They're creatures of habit. After a score, they always go to the same place. A burlesque house on 52nd Street. The Gilded Cage. They sit in the back, get drunk, and cause trouble. 5 names. 5 locations. 5 men who were breathing, eating, laughing, while Sammy lay on a cold slab. Bumpy turned to the map. He began placing pins. 1 in Little Italy. 1 in the Bronx. 1 in East Harlem. 2 on 52nd Street. He stepped back, looking at the constellation of doom he had just created. Del, he said, turning to his lieutenant. Take a team. Go to the Bronx. I want Frankie the Pipe. I don't want him hurt. I just want him brought to the warehouse on the pier. Quietly, he pointed to another lieutenant, a wiry man named Silas. Silas, you take the social club in Little Italy. Polly the Weasel. Same instructions. Bring him to the warehouse. No rough stuff. Just a car ride. He looked at 2 of his biggest, toughest men, June and Pops. You two. The Gilded Cage. The twins. This will be trickier. Wait for them to leave. They'll be drunk. Persuade them to come with you. Bring them to the warehouse. What about Fat Tony, Bumpy? Del asked. He's with the capo, Gallo. Bumpy walked to his desk and opened a drawer, removing a long, thin object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it, revealing a gleaming stiletto, its blade honed to a razor's edge. Fat Tony, he said softly, is mine. The clock on the wall read 11:58 p.m. Less than 24 hours had passed since Sammy died. The hunt was on. October 25, 1959, 1:47 a.m. Alley behind Patsy's restaurant, East Harlem. The kitchen door swung open, spilling yellow light and the smell of garlic into the alley. Fat Tony Rizzoli stepped out, belching loudly. He fumbled for a cigarette, his massive frame blocking the doorway. Bumpy watched from the deeper shadows across the alley, a ghost in a dark suit. He'd sent a kid in with a note for Gallo, a fake tip about a police raid. Gallo and his other men had scattered out the front. Fat Tony, arrogant and slow, was told to wait by the back. Bumpy moved. He didn't rush. He flowed out of the darkness, silent as smoke. Tony was lighting his cigarette when Bumpy's arm snaked around his thick neck, cutting off his air. A hand clamped over his mouth before he could make a sound. The tip of the stiletto pressed against the soft flesh under his jaw. One sound, and this goes through your tongue and into your brain. Bumpy whispered in his ear. We're going for a walk. Terror bloomed in the big man's eyes. He nodded frantically. Bumpy steered him out of the alley and toward a dark sedan idling at the corner. The back door opened. Bumpy shoved him in, climbing in after him. The car pulled away from the curb without a sound. Inside the car, Tony was hyperventilating. Who are you? What do you want? Money? I got money. Bumpy just looked at him. He didn't say a word. He let the silence and the fear do the work. The drive to the warehouse on Pier 45 was the longest 10 minutes of Tony Rizzoli's life. He was a mountain of a man, a feared enforcer, and he was trembling like a leaf in the presence of this quiet, cold man in the expensive suit. He had no idea who Bumpy was. He just knew he was in the presence of death itself. October 25, 1959, 2:30 a.m. Warehouse, Pier 45. The warehouse was vast and cold, smelling of salt water and rust. A single bare bulb hung from the high ceiling, illuminating a small circle of concrete floor. In the center of the circle stood 4 men, their hands tied behind their backs. Polly the Weasel, Frankie the Pipe, and the Lucchese twins. They were scared, confused, trying to put on a brave face. The car door slammed, and Bumpy marched Fat Tony in, pushing him into the circle with the others. Now there were 5. Bumpy circled them slowly, like a shark inspecting its prey. Del and a dozen of Bumpy's men stood in the shadows along the walls, silent sentinels armed with shotguns and tire irons. Do you know who I am? Bumpy asked the silence. Polly the Weasel, trying to sound tough, spat on the floor. Some nigger with a death wish, looks like. Bumpy stopped in front of him. He didn't flinch. He just smiled, a thin, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wrong answer, he nodded to Delaware. Del stepped forward and, with a single, efficient motion, shattered Polly's kneecap with a short lead pipe. Polly screamed, a high, piercing shriek, and collapsed. Bumpy's voice cut through the scream, cold as ice. I am the man whose business you interfered with yesterday. I am the man whose employee you murdered. He crouched down in front of the writhing Polly. A 12-year-old boy. An orphan. You remember him? Skinny kid. Missing a tooth. Recognition dawned on the faces of the Lucchese twins. Vinny paled. It was just a little shakedown. We didn't mean. You left him to die in an alley. Bumpy said, his voice dangerously low. 5 of you. And you laughed. He stood up and walked over to Frankie the pipe. You're a plumber. You know about pressure. About how things break. He looked at Fat Tony. You're the muscle. You understand force. He looked at the twins. And you too. You held him down. You enjoyed it. He walked to the center of the circle. The boy's name was Sammy. He was 12 years old. And before he died, he made me a promise. He asked me to make sure you 5 gentlemen never laughed again. Bumpy looked at his watch. 2:45 a.m. I am a man of my word. He turned to his men. I want them to understand. I want them to know why this is happening. Tell them about Sammy. Tell them about the St. Nicholas shelter. Tell them about his Lucky Star tattoo. And when you are done telling them, he said, turning to walk toward the warehouse door, gut them like the fish they are. He didn't look back. As he stepped out into the cold night air, the first scream echoed from behind him, sharp and full of agony. It was followed by another and another. It was not the sound of laughter. Bumpy got into the back of his Lincoln. The 36-hour clock had stopped. The promise was kept. October 27, 1959, 10 a.m., St. Raphael's Church. The funeral was small. Sister Mary, a handful of children from the orphanage, Del, and Bumpy. Sammy lay in a small, polished mahogany casket, the best money could buy. He was dressed in a new suit. He looked like he was sleeping. Bumpy had paid for it all. He stood in the back of the church, his face impassive. He hadn't slept. He had just watched the sun rise over the river, the screams from the warehouse a fading echo in his mind. He felt no satisfaction, no relief, just a vast hollow ache. Vengeance was a bitter meal. It didn't bring the boy back. After the service, as they lowered the small casket into the ground, Sister Mary approached him. She was a stern-looking woman, but her eyes were kind. Mr. Rhodes, she said quietly, the police were at the orphanage, asking about Samuel, and the men who were found by the river this morning. I'm sure they were, Bumpy said. They say it was you, she said, her gaze steady. They say you did a terrible thing. Bumpy looked at Sammy's grave, a small patch of earth under a large oak tree. I did what was necessary, sister. Vengeance is the Lord's, Mr. Rhodes. The Lord is welcome to it, Bumpy replied, his voice rough. But he's a busy man. Sometimes you have to handle his business for him on the ground floor. That money I gave you, the fund, it's real. My man Delroy will be in touch every month. Those children will want for nothing. That is my penance. She studied his face for a long moment. God have mercy on your soul, son. He can get in line, Bumpy said, turning to walk away. He knew they were coming for him. The Gambinos would scream, the feds would investigate. The murder of 5 made men, no matter how low-ranking, was not something that could be ignored. He had signed his own death warrant, or at least his own prison sentence, and he found that he didn't care. November 18, 1959. Federal Courthouse, Foley Square. Bumpy stood before the judge, his face a stone mask. He hadn't fought the charges. He offered no defense. He pled guilty to 5 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom was packed. The Gambino family was there, their faces filled with hate. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge, a man named Thurgood Marshall, looked down at him with weary, intelligent eyes. Ellsworth, Bumpy Rhodes, you are a menace and a king in your own world. You have lived by the sword, and it is a miracle you have not died by it. The court sentences you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. You will be transferred to the federal penitentiary at Alcatraz. Alcatraz, the Rock, the end of the line. Bumpy didn't react. He just nodded once. As they led him away in chains, he caught Del's eye in the crowd. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Take care of the fund. Take care of the children. Del nodded back. The message was received. The king was leaving his castle, but his last decree would be honored. July 12, 1964. Cell Block D, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The world had shrunk to a 5 by 9 foot cell. Concrete and steel. The cold Pacific fog was his constant companion. The days were marked by bells and whistles and the endless, monotonous clang of metal on metal. Bumpy had been on the rock for nearly 5 years. He was no longer a king. He was inmate #AZ1441. But in his mind, he was still building his kingdom. His only contact with the outside world was through carefully coded letters to and from Delaware. "My dearest D," he would write, using the formal language they had agreed upon. Inquiries regarding our charitable agricultural investment, Project SS, continue to yield positive returns. The latest report on the scholarship recipients was most heartening. Please forward my congratulations to young Michael on his acceptance into the engineering program. His success is a testament to the fertility of the soil we have cultivated. Project SS was Sammy's shield. Scholarship recipients were the orphans. Dell's replies were his lifeline. They came with photographs. A picture of a young girl in a graduation cap. A boy in a baseball uniform, holding a trophy. A group of smiling children on a field trip to the Statue of Liberty. Something they never would have done without the fund. Bumpy kept the photos hidden in a hollowed-out book. At night, under the dim light of his cell, he would look at them. He studied their faces. Happy, healthy children. Safe children. He never spoke of Sammy. He never wrote his name. But the boy was with him always. He was the ghost in the cell, the whisper in the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. Bumpy's guilt had not faded. It had transformed. It was no longer a destructive fire but a forge, shaping his remaining years into a singular purpose. He had taken 5 lives. He would spend the rest of his own saving hundreds more. It was a grim, unbalanced equation, but it was the only math he had left. One letter from Dell contained a newspaper clipping. It was an article from the Amsterdam News. Harlem's guardian angel. Anonymous benefactor transforms St. Nicholas Orphanage. The article detailed how the once struggling orphanage was now a model institution, with a new library, a college fund, and health services, all thanks to a mysterious, consistent donation stream known only as Sammy's shield. Sister Mary was quoted. "We lost a dear boy some years ago," she said. "But out of that tragedy, a miracle has grown. Samuel's legacy is in the laughter of these children." Bumpy read the clipping until the paper was soft and frayed. Laughter. The word hit him hard. He thought of Sammy's last request. They don't get to laugh. He had ensured that. But here, now, was a different kind of laughter. The laughter of innocent children. The sound of hope. He had silenced the wicked, and in their place, this new, purer sound had risen. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, the hollow ache in his chest eased, just a fraction. March 21, 1969. Office of the Warden, Alcatraz. Bumpy was old now, not in years, but in the way that prison ages a man from the inside out. His hair was gray, his powerful frame stooped. He had been on the rock for almost a decade. It had closed in '63, but he, along with a few other high-profile lifers, had been transferred to other federal prisons, finally ending up at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. His health was failing. The warden called him into his office. A man in a suit from the Justice Department was there. "Rhodes," the warden said, "your sentence has been commuted. Compassionate release. You have terminal cancer. 6 months, they say." Bumpy just stared. Freedom. It was a word that had lost all meaning. What was there to be free for? "There's a man waiting for you," the man from Justice said. "He's handled your affairs for the last 10 years. A Mr. Delroy Washington. Delaware." He was outside. Bumpy felt a flicker of something, a warmth in the cold embers of his heart. He was given a new suit, a cheap, ill-fitting thing that felt like a costume. He walked out of the prison gates, blinking in the bright, unfamiliar sun. And there was Dell, leaning against a black Cadillac, looking older, grayer, but with the same loyal, steady eyes. He opened the car door for Bumpy. The king and his driver, reunited. "Where to, Bumpy?" Dell asked, his voice thick with emotion. Bumpy was silent for a long time as the car pulled away, leaving the prison behind. "Take me home, Dell," he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Take me to Harlem." March 23, 1969. 3 p.m. St. Nicholas Children's Home, Harlem. Harlem had changed. It felt different. The energy on the streets, a mix of hope and anger Bumpy didn't recognize. But the orphanage, now called the St. Nicholas Children's Home, was transformed. The old, grim building was freshly painted. There was a new wing, a playground in the back where the sound of children playing echoed. The Samuel J. Jones Memorial Library. Bumpy walked through the front doors, leaning heavily on a cane. Dell was at his side. Sister Mary, much older now, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, met them in the foyer. Her stern expression melted when she saw him. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, taking his frail hand in hers. "Welcome home." She led him through the halls. He saw the library, filled with books and children sitting at tables, reading. He saw the clean, bright dormitory rooms. He saw the photos on the wall, the graduates, the sports teams, the smiling faces he had memorized in his cell. "Your penance," Sister Mary said softly, "has borne incredible fruit." He didn't know what to say. He felt like a ghost, an observer in a world he had created but was no longer a part of. They walked out to the playground. Children were running, shouting, laughing. That sound again, pure and clean. A small boy, about 10 years old, ran up to Sister Mary, holding a book. "Sister, can I ask Mr. Washington a question about the Yankees?" "This isn't Mr. Washington, James," Sister Mary said gently. "This is Mr. Rhodes. He's a very old friend of the home. He's the one who made all of this possible." The boy, James, looked up at Bumpy with wide, curious eyes. He had a gap-toothed smile, just like Sammy. He looked from the new library to the playground, then back to Bumpy's tired, weathered face. He seemed to understand, in the simple, profound way that children do, the weight of the gift he was living in. He stepped forward and reached out, his small hand wrapping around Bumpy's arm. He looked up at the old, dying kingpin, the man who had traded his life for theirs. "Thank you, Pop," the boy said. Pop, the word, so simple, so pure, struck Bumpy Rhodes with the force of a revelation. It was not the name of a king. It was not the name of a killer. It was the name of a father. In the laughter of the children, in the name whispered by a boy he had never met, Bumpy's legacy was finally written. He had lost a kingdom of crime and shadow, and in its place, he had built a quiet, enduring empire of hope. He looked over the playground, at the children who were safe, who were laughing, and a slow, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in a decade. The debt was paid.